We have an HQ exclusive for you. Ryan Wilson put together a tiny little mock draft just for us. Now, this is based on current records. If the season ended today, the Carolina Panthers would get the number 1 pick. He has them taking CJ Stroud out of Ohio State, one of 4 quarterbacks in his top 8. Got Will Levis going to Washington, Anthony Richardson going to Atlanta, and Bryce Young going to the Houston Texans. Let's dive into it with the mock man himself, Ryan Wilson, here on HQ. We appreciate you doing this for us, Ryan. This is only here on HQ. You won't see it on the website, just right here. So, talk us through why CJ Stroud is your number 1 and why the Panthers are going for him.
If I'm being honest, Chris, because my last mock draft that came out a few weeks ago, there was such a huge pushback against Will Levis at the top, I just decided to mix it up. That's not entirely true. There's a mix of opinions at the top of the draft about who this first quarterback is going to be. You mentioned 4 in the top 8. This quarterback class, as we sit here in the middle of August, is much deeper than it was a year ago when we only saw Kenny Pickett go in round 1. And now the question becomes, what flavor of ice cream do you like? Do you like the Will Levis who has the projectable traits? Do you like CJ Stroud who does everything really well? Anthony Richardson who's a bit raw? So this time around, I went with C.J. Stroud. He's coming off 2 really good games against Wisconsin, and then last week that drubbing of Michigan State. And there's a lot to like. He has a running game around him, which certainly helps. And he has a lot of really good playmakers around him, like Marvin Harrison Jr., for example. Jackson Smith-Njigba's been out with an injury, but the list of playmakers goes deep and long. And here's the other thing. At the top of this draft, Carolina, we have them picking as we currently sit here with that 1-4 record. David Tepper is not a patient man. Matt Rule found it out officially the other day. And I can guarantee you this. Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, P.J. Walker are currently the quarterbacks on that roster. The quarterback for the Carolina Panthers in 2023 is currently not on the roster. He will be drafted almost certainly with one of these picks, probably a top 5, top 3, given how their season is going. And C.J. Stroud is very much going to be the mix for that job.
Short of the Panthers getting that number 1 pick, do you think it's Will Anderson going there at number 1? In this mock, you have him going 2 to the Raiders.
Yeah, so Will Anderson is this year's version of Chase Young a few years ago when Joe Burrow went first, or Aiden Hutchinson even last year, in terms of the edge rusher who you can pencil in immediately and have huge upside, huge production. Aiden Hutchinson, already has 3 sacks early in his NFL career. Chase Young has battled those injuries. But of those names I mentioned, Will Anderson's probably the best football player and arguably the best football player in this draft class. I've talked to people close to the Alabama program, and they think that Will Anderson is the best player defensively in the Nick Saban era, which goes back to 2007, and maybe the second best player defensively ever at Alabama after Derek Thomas. That gives you an indication of just how good he is on a team full of 5 stars. He stands out above those players, and I think his wait time in the old draft green room is going to be a short one, whether it's first, second, or third, depending on how these quarterbacks come off the board.
He definitely would have been first overall last season if he was eligible to come out. We'll see what happens with the quarterbacks this year, but I can't imagine that anybody would think that they could go wrong with Will Anderson no matter where they get him. But more teams in need of quarterbacks. We heard Ron Rivera this week saying the difference between Washington and the other 3 teams in that division is at the quarterback position, and you have them taking a quarterback number 5 overall in Will Levis, who some people have said, I don't see it. Why do you see it in Will Levis?
No, that's a fair point. Absolutely. And this is going to be a projection-based argument. Will Levis didn't play last week in their loss to South Carolina. The week before, he didn't play great in the loss to Ole Miss, in part because the offensive line wasn't very good for Kentucky. But in terms of projectable traits, what you look for when you're building, quote-unquote, an NFL quarterback in the lab, it looks a lot like Will Levis. He's tall, he's strong, he has a great arm, makes good decisions in the pocket, although you could question that over the course of this season, and that's certainly fair. Has gotten better each and every year after transferring from Penn State, and he's incredibly smart. And all these things taken together, he's going to be probably this year's Mac Jones in terms of divisiveness as we go through this process trying to sort out these quarterbacks. But again, he isn't built like Mac Jones if you're looking for that prototypical quarterback. And in Washington in particular, as you mentioned, Ron Rivera basically threw Carson Wentz under the bus, and perhaps no surprise, but also we saw in that report today from ESPN about Dan Snyder. Dan Snyder wanted Carson Wentz, wanted the team to go out and get him, and that's what happened, and now the marriages are working. So you feel like whoever the owner is, whoever the coach is, the quarterback is going to be different, especially if they have a high draft pick, and it could certainly be Will Levis as we get through this draft process.
So he's the second quarterback off your board in this mock draft. You just did the top 10 teams right now based on if things ended right now. Anthony Richardson you have going to the Falcons, Bryce Young to the Texans. Some would ask, why Richardson over Bryce Young?
It's going to come down to a few things, but primarily size and durability. Bryce Young missed last week's game because of his shoulder injury, although incidentally, the shoulder injury was one that any player of any size could have suffered. He was stretching and landed on his shoulder awkwardly. I don't think that's a victim of being too small, but I think taken in totality, he is undersized by NFL standards. And I've mentioned this before when we've talked, Chris, that the NFL QB size thing is cyclical, it feels like. Russ Wilson sort of paved the way for these smaller quarterbacks and Kyler Murray, and then we see guys like Baker Mayfield struggle with getting the ball past the line of scrimmage. And I wonder if it's going to, the ebb and flow is going to go in the direction of the bigger QBs. I love everything about Bryce Young's game. He's having a great season, and it's hard to argue that he hasn't had a better season than Anthony Richardson. And you see Bryce Young here making plays, and much like C.J. Stroud, he's got a bunch of dudes on his team to help him with yards after the catch. I would argue that Bryce is probably a little more advanced right now in terms of throwing the ball down the field than C.J., but it's pretty close. Anthony Richardson's in a different category, and he's in a different category because he is so incredibly raw. He attempted fewer than 60 passes last season when he was sharing snaps with Emory Jones, and now he's the dude, and we've seen some good, like the Utah game, and even glimpses during the Tennessee game, and we've seen some bad, and it's not been great. So you have to be able to project what Anthony Richardson's going to look like 2-3 years from now, as opposed to just getting caught up in what we see every Saturday, because he's a special talent. And I've said it before, he reminds me a little bit of Dante Culpepper, a little bit of Josh Allen when he was raw at Wyoming. And if you can squint your eyes and see into the future, I think he has a chance to be the best quarterback in this group.
Ryan, how about somebody that right now might not be looked at as a top 10 pick, who you could see play himself into that position by season's end?
I don't know if you saw my eyes get big because I forgot what I told Noah, but it's Quentin Johnston, the wide receiver out of TCU. And the groups of wide receivers are pretty bunched up right now. You have Kayshon Boutte out of LSU, who doesn't really have a quarterback that's consistently getting him the ball, so it's hard to figure out who he is. Quentin Johnston has started slow this season, but he had some huge catches last week in that TCU game. And I think he's a big, fast, strong target who makes contested catches. He reminds me the best of Chase Claypool. I know Steelers fans are frustrated with Claypool now in terms of making big plays after his rookie season. He's sort of fallen off from that, but Quentin Johnston has those type of abilities. And you see here this great catch against Kansas in the back of the end zone, got his foot down. That's what he gives you. And that big catch radius is something that you can't really have enough of when you have a young quarterback, especially who perhaps struggles with pinpoint accuracy. So I think he has a chance, if he continues to play like he did last week, to move his way to that conversation as a top 10 pick, because we're going to have a run on wide receivers like we do every year, Chris, because these wide receivers now, coming out of high school into college, are such big-time players that they can contribute immediately, and I think Johnson's showing that with the way he's playing recently for TCU.
HQ exclusive from Ryan Wilson here, a top 10 mock, just to wet our whistle a little bit, 4 quarterbacks going in the top 8. Ryan, thank you so much. Much more NFL, all the NFL you can handle, really, on the latest Pick 6 podcast. It's the Brady Quinn Hour, discussing the top storylines of the week that include Brady giving up his first $1,000 for a Jets win, and why Russell Wilson is hated right now among analysts who cover the NFL.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.